Hello, and welcome to Nightmare Masterclass. My name is David Stockdale. I'll be your host on this excursion into the dark unknown. In this very special installment, I'll be presenting my analysis of, well, this is actually kind of complicated. Salad Fingers is an animated web series that began in 2004. It was created by an artist named David Firth. In 2017, I covered one of Firth's videos on my channel, an animated short called Cream. Firth's body of work tends to be surreal and sometimes extremely disturbing. Salad Fingers is a series that revolves around a strange being who lives in a remote wasteland of sorts. In the series, Salad Fingers talks to his finger puppets, has a strange obsession with rust, and in the latest iteration, has a run-in with his so-called Glass Brother. Just to give you a bit of personal context, I was about 15 years old when the first Salad Fingers was released. This was in the days of Newgrounds, and I don't really remember my initial impressions of the first installment other than being totally weirded out, and yet strangely drawn in by the utterly surrealistic manner in which this animated short presented itself. Well, roughly 15 years have passed since the first animated short was released, and since then, Firth has created 10 additional videos. So that's a total of 11 installments of Salad Fingers. This has inevitably prompted the question, now just what the heck is going on in this thing? Search for Salad Fingers fan theory on Google or YouTube, and you'll find an overwhelming number of examples, including, but not limited to, Salad Fingers is the survivor of a worldwide zombie outbreak. Salad Fingers is a cannibal. Salad Fingers has multiple personality disorder, and Hubert Cumberdale is his true personality. Salad Fingers is the survivor of a nuclear war of global proportions. Salad Fingers takes place in the Fallout universe. Salad Fingers is the outcast of a society that kicks out people they deem to be physically or mentally deficient. Salad Fingers lives in a hellish alternate timeline that branched off after World War I. Salad Fingers is based on the nightmares of its creator, David Firth. Salad Fingers takes place in the distant universe of a post-apocalyptic BBC docudrama called Threads. Salad Fingers is a veteran with PTSD. Salad Fingers is the so-called man who rules the universe in the fictional universe of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Salad Fingers was a historian who specialized in World War I, and he went insane after a nuclear apocalypse. Salad Fingers is a Time Lord from the Doctor Who universe. Salad Fingers is some kind of hive mind. Salad Fingers is an alternative version of Lenny from Of Mice and Men. Salad Fingers is somehow related to Slender Man. Salad Fingers murdered his entire family and deludes himself into thinking otherwise in order to cope with the guilt. Salad Fingers takes place in the Warhammer 40k universe. Salad Fingers is related to Murdoch from the Gorillaz. Salad Fingers is the survivor of the first alien war in the XCOM universe. Salad Fingers is in a psychosomatic coma in a psychiatric hospital. The list goes on. Now, I just want to say that fan theories like these are generally pretty fun, and I have nothing against this line of speculation per se. I certainly don't want to discourage you from making fan theories if that's an activity that brings you joy. And it really does say something about Salad Fingers, the series, that it has provoked such a lively discussion. Though, I'm just going to put this out there. I can't help but feel like these sorts of theories are woefully insufficient in terms of their depth. This manner in which people try to connect the dots in literal terms with respect to Salad Fingers is, I think, a symptom of a certain problem with respect to the way the discourse is shaped surrounding viral works of surrealism such as this. And I should note that it's fairly rare to see interpretations of Salad Fingers that go beyond this surface level kind of fan theory speculation. For example, if Salad Fingers takes place sometime after World War I, what might this say about industrialization, or the consequences of war, or modernity itself? Can we connect Salad Fingers to the Dadaist movement or other trends in surrealist art? Or here's another thing. Salad Fingers talks to inanimate objects over the course of the series. And because of this, there has been a general tendency to claim that Salad Fingers suffers from some form of mental illness. Okay, fair enough, I guess, but if that's the case, what might this say about our perception of mental illness? What might it say about this category that various social institutions tend to impose on people? you don't really see any popular fan theories approaching this level of discussion in relation to salad fingers. Worse yet, there is a tendency to eschew any form of analysis whatsoever. Some people think that all of the weird, disturbing elements of salad fingers exist for mere shock value. There is a certain flatness to the discourse surrounding this surreal and uncanny cartoon series. This pervasive tendency to form so-called fan theories is characterized by a general striving to provide literal answers, to offer a novel, speculative effort at the level of the story, the fictional universe of the work. Such theories almost never exceed the narrow confines thereof. There is virtually no discourse surrounding the socio-political implications of a work, or the manner in which said work can serve as a social commentary in some way. Rather, the work is construed as a playground of sorts, one in which a very specific game is encouraged. And this game has parameters that, in any other context, we'd likely consider a little counterintuitive and needlessly restrictive. The precise conditions that give rise to the flattening of interpretations of this kind, ones either devoid of subtextual analysis or distinctly lacking in that respect, is admittedly a fairly thorny question. I will say right off the bat that I don't think any one component of Salad Fingers, the series, is the reason for this very constrained level of discussion. Rather, I would say the work prompts the viewer to ask deep, incisive questions about our own reality. You know, there are a lot of really absurd elements in Salad Fingers, and the main character doesn't really question these things because they're a part of his world. Similarly, I think there are a lot of really absurd elements to our reality. For instance, have you ever wondered why Imagine Dragons exists? Like, what the fuck is this shit? There are a lot of things we have just accepted as natural, when really they're a strange product of history. They're contingent upon a number of historical circumstances, and they're unique to our time. But this sort of analysis is not really happening to any significant degree with respect to Salad Fingers, at least as far as I can tell. I will modestly suggest that the reason for this has a lot to do with the environment that fosters discussion. It would suffice to say that the predominance of this surface-level type of analysis is inevitable, given the current state of the media landscape. The ecosystem of YouTube in particular has a homogenizing effect on the discourse surrounding these viral works of surrealism. This is largely a product of the incentives created by YouTube. But I also believe there's a larger issue at play as well, one which pertains to the economic framework in which companies like Google have become dominant. This is something I touched on in my last video, specifically in reference to Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, and the predominance of the so-called media theory. It is all the more obvious in the case of Salad Fingers. It's a phenomenon that speaks to larger problems with respect to the manner in which critical dialogue is actively disincentivized within online spaces, especially when profit motive comes into the equation. I'm speaking largely in reference to YouTube on that last point. Every time a new installation of Salad Fingers comes out, countless fan theory videos inevitably follow on YouTube. Notably, David Firth has even gone on record to state that certain fan theories are wildly incorrect. And while of course I regard death of the author as the most prudent attitude to adopt with respect to a creator's take on their own work, see my video on the matter for additional context, I do have to say that Firth's dismissal of these kinds of interpretations is highly amusing to me. I kind of wish more artists and writers would start busting our chops when we critics and commentators make a claim that they consider to be inaccurate. It's funny to me. I am half expecting the creator of Petscop to come out of the woodwork at some point and send me a message saying, "You know nothing of my work." Anyway, Salad Fingers is a media entity that seems to generate endless amounts of fan theory videos. You might even say there's a strange sort of self-perpetuating feedback loop that has come about as a result of Salad Fingers' popularity. So, from the perspective of a YouTuber, let's say your fan theory video gets recommended on one of David Firth's videos. Whether or not this happens depends entirely on the YouTube algorithm. So, assuming the algorithm decides your video is an ideal selection to recommend, you could very well have a new viral video on your hands with all of the benefits that entails. Rinse and repeat. Maybe you get a few of these viral videos under your belt, and all of a sudden you have a viable side business on your hands. You grow more and more each day. Eventually, maybe you have a sizable platform, the biggest you've ever had. You start getting offers to do sponsored content. You're maybe even able to make a living, a good living perhaps, just from your YouTube channel. Of course, this doesn't happen for everyone. There are varying levels of success, and only a handful of people have reached a level of success that basically enables them to make YouTube a full-time job. But the fact remains that an entire niche industry has emerged on the basis of quote-unquote explaining enigmatic works like Salad Fingers. And now there are even reaction videos to these fan theory presentations. In economic terms, I would say this is something akin to rent-seeking behavior, or at least there's an element of that. I shall cheekily refer to this phenomenon as the fan theory industrial complex, which is sort of a play on the term military industrial complex. If you're not aware, the military industrial complex refers to the informal alliance between a nation's military and its defense industry, contractors that make weapons. This is a term typically used in reference to the United States. It was popularized by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in his farewell address to the nation.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Now, of course, the proliferation of fan theories is certainly not harmful in the way that the defense industry's tacit alliance with the US government generally is. No one is getting killed over the way someone interprets a surreal animated web series. And my intention here is not to moralize with respect to certain individuals on YouTube. That's not really my style. And more to the point, those who formulate fan theories on YouTube are merely responding to certain incentives within our environment. There is undoubtedly an economic imperative to keep making fresh content. I'm doing the clap thing in case anyone was wondering. This imperative tends to limit the degree to which any one particular topic can be researched in depth. I will state very plainly that I am not somehow above this. I am subject to the same incentives that drive other YouTubers. And I have no negative feelings towards those who take part in what I have jokingly referred to as the fan theory industrial complex. There is perhaps an argument to be made that I myself am a part of this complex. But this isn't really about individual choices, and it isn't about morality per se. Rather, I'm driven by a certain curiosity to understand the material basis for the proliferation of such theories, not just in relation to Salad Fingers, but also in relation to, well, pretty much any surreal piece of media that has ended up going viral. And I think it's fair to say that the ubiquity of these kinds of theories has a certain cultural influence of its own, and it's not necessarily a good one. You might even say it's killing art. Hey, capitalism. Can you please stop killing art? Please? Yeah, I know I'm screaming into the void, but it was worth a shot. So I do think the manner in which art is received in this system has a negative impact on art in general. Or at the very least, there's a correlation there. I don't think it fosters an environment that is conducive to the creation of good art. I mean, I tend to think there's a real potential for one of the strangest artistic renaissances in human history right now. But it doesn't seem to be happening, at least not on the scale that I think it should be happening. It's almost like we live in some sort of tangent universe in which things have gone horribly wrong. Case in point, Imagine Dragons. The fact that Imagine Dragons exists is proof of what I'm saying. But perhaps more importantly, the conditions that have created the fan theory industrial complex have wide-ranging consequences in other areas as well. Our media landscape as a whole is subject to these same perverse incentives. It is worth considering how these various incentives shape the discussion. Simply put, there are certain necessary preconditions that allow for the possibility of asking certain types of questions. The question that is most incentivized with respect to a work like Salad Fingers is ironically the one that the work is most immune to, namely, just what the heck is going on? There is an unrelenting sort of economic imperative that exists which drives YouTubers to try to answer this question in a purely literal fashion, and YouTubers are generally rewarded for doing so. The sorts of questions we have least incentivized, or you might even say disincentivized from asking are, ironically enough, the ones I'm most interested in exploring, generally speaking. This rule of thumb is not entirely rigid. It's not like I'm never surprised at what performs well on my channel, but it is worth noting that my best performing videos are the ones veiled in the guise of fan theory logic. Is Eric Andre in hell? Rick and Morty, the simulation theory? Even to some degree, the Petscop investigation. I always try to go beyond surface level, literal-minded speculation in my videos, but it really feels like an uphill battle. Our culture has shifted in some respects to a very literalist paradigm when it comes to our understanding of art, pop culture, politics, and, well, pretty much everything. I, for one, believe this is a result of the gradual reification of capitalist relations in all social interaction. Moreover, I'd like to modestly suggest that the proliferation of fan theories is a product of the attention economy. I think we live in a time when the attention generated by a YouTube video can serve as something of a justification for the ideas presented in the video. You know, if a video is generating attention on the level of like millions of views, it must have something to it, right? I think we've been conditioned to think in this way. Just take a look at YouTube's so-called Creator Academy to get a sense of what I'm talking about. Here's a short excerpt from their website. Creators often ask, what kind of videos does the algorithm like most? Our systems have no opinion about what type of video you make, and it doesn't favor any particular format. Rather, they try their best to follow the audience by paying attention to things like what they watch, what they don't watch, how much time they spend watching, likes and dislikes, not interested feedback. So just to be entirely clear, if your video is not performing well, or if some really low quality video is performing great, it's not the algorithm's fault. Please don't blame the algorithm. No, if your video isn't doing well, it's essentially because people don't like the content you're making. It's not a systemic issue, it's a matter of individual choices. The algorithm is simply a totality of users' choices. That's the subtext of this statement. And in a certain sense, this is a democratic ethos. The people are deciding what content they want to see. That's YouTube's position. And you know what? Maybe the folks at YouTube actually believe this, and maybe their rationale makes sense in certain contexts. But the truth is that when algorithms are applied at this scale, we can observe quite plainly the screwy effects of market logic when it comes to this thing we've vaguely labeled content. In the political sphere, we can observe how fascists have weaponized YouTube's platform to spread hateful propaganda and indoctrinate young men. Sadly, but not surprisingly, this has resulted in violence. Within the underlying economic framework in which the vast majority of folks are made to sell their labor to private companies, well, what people want in such a framework is already a dubious proposition. People are operating from a compromised position in the system. What they want, in large part, is whatever makes their brains feel good after a day's labor. And that is a very limited set of content indeed. In many cases, it's stuff that caters to underlying biases. And sometimes it's just mindless escapism. We're one to operate solely on this, let's call it discourse, for lack of a better term. It would almost be as though a work like Salad Fingers exists in some self-contained bubble, floating around with other strange viral enterprises, commodities like Alan Tutorial, Too Many Cooks, and Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. We've been conditioned to treat virtually everything in market terms, and so it makes sense that the only abstractions that come naturally to us are ones that already exist within an underlying framework, one rooted in the self-justifying terms of market demand. We might well construe the latest installment of Salad Fingers as a meta-commentary about how the dominant fan theories have shaped the general understanding of the work, with the so-called Glass Brother representing the distorted version of Salad Fingers evoked by these various theories. This version of Salad Fingers is a vulgar, simplistic sort of caricature of the work itself. The Glass Brother is an artful representation of how we, the viewers, perceive Salad Fingers. Salad Fingers, the character, sublimates the dissonance he feels at the sight of this distorted version of himself by creating a real-life flesh boy out of Hubert Cumberdale. He wants to make something authentic in order to negate the inauthenticity of his Glass Brother, a distorted version of himself created by commodity fetishism. Now, I don't mean to suggest that there is some pure or undistorted interpretation out there that has yet to be uncovered, or that David Firth's view of his own work, to the extent that it can really be understood, is necessarily the be-all, end-all way to view the series. I don't really prize artistic intentions in my interpretation of a work like Salad Fingers, and I don't think there's a truth to be uncovered, exactly. Salad Fingers is a part of a tradition of surrealist art. At its best, I believe surreal art has the ability to make us look at our own lives in a different way. And I do think that despite these perverse incentives created by our current economic system, there is an opportunity to broaden the horizons of discourse, both with respect to the analysis of works like Salad Fingers, as well as other topics. If what I've said in this video even remotely resonates with you, I would urge you to join me in this effort in whatever capacity you can. Ask questions, don't accept overly simplistic answers, change the terms of the conversation, make critical connections, synthesize. I will say that when I form an interpretation of a work, I try to relate it to broader topics that drive the discussion in a direction that provokes critical thinking. That's always been my general goal with this channel. And that's basically what I'm trying to do with this video, so I hope you liked it. That wraps it up for this installment of Nightmare Masterclass. If you enjoy my videos and have a few bucks to spare, please consider supporting me on Ko-fi.com/Nightmare Masterclass. Any amount large or small is highly appreciated. Thank you for watching, and good night.